Welcome to the Future Christian Podcast, your source for insights and ideas on how to lead your church into the 21st century. At the Future Christian Podcast, we talk to pastors, authors, and other faith leaders for helpful advice and practical wisdom to help you and your community of faith walk boldly into the future. Now, here's your host, Lauren Richmond Jr.
Welcome to the Future Christian Podcast. This is Lauren Richmond Jr., and today we're welcoming Reverend Dr. Irie Session to the show. Dr. Irie was raised in New York City and now resides in Cedar Hill, Texas, a suburb of Dallas. She's the proud mother of India Liana Session. Dr. Irie holds a BS in social work from Oklahoma Christian University, an MDiv with a certificate in Black Church Studies from Bright Divinity School at Texas Christian University, and a Doctor of Ministry from Colgate Rochester Crozier Divinity School, specializing in transformative leadership and prophetic preaching. She's an ordained minister with the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, CEO of Dream Big Coaching and Consulting, and also co-pastor at the Gathering Experience, a womanist church in Texas. Okay, welcome to the Future Christian Podcast. I am Lauren Richmond Jr., and I'm grateful to be joined today by Reverend Dr. Irie Session. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for this wonderful invitation.
Yeah, so we're actually a special recording here today. We're live, we're not live, but we're recording from Phillips Seminary in Tulsa, Oklahoma as part of the Remind and Renew conference, and Dr. Irie is here as a presenter. So she'll be presenting as we're recording tomorrow. And so grateful to have this conversation. I think I'll give a plug here to Phillips. I think this material will be available after the fact from the conference, as I understand. So if you'd like to learn more about the conference and some of the conversations taking place, we just came from a great presentation from Dr. Scott Thumma, who, for listeners, I had on the pod a couple episodes back. And I'm curious, I want to hear, that might influence some of our conversation today, because I think there's some overlap that I'm curious, and hopefully we'll get a chance to talk on that. But share, if you would, just kind of about yourself, Dr. Irie, and your story.
Well, you've already shared my bio, and I would like to add that I have an amazing, beautifully talented millennial daughter, India Liana, and I left her at home with our two cats. So I'm glad to be here today. Wow. So what else can I tell you about me? I am a senior citizen. I know I don't look like a senior citizen, but I am 64 years old, but I feel amazing. I have begun engaging in fitness with my daughter, who's a fitness coach.
Mm-hmm.
And so probably for the last 7 or 8 months, I've been taking my health more seriously and working out on a regular basis, because ministry is physical as well as spiritual.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, great. Thanks for sharing that. Talk a little bit about your faith journey, what that's looked like in the past and what that looks like today.
Well, I was theologized in Churches of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
My church of my baptism is Churches of Christ. And I was in my early 40s when I transitioned from Churches of Christ to the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, which Phillips Theological Seminary is a institution that is Disciples of Christ. And so my early formation was really more fundamentalist.
Mm-hmm.
It was a Black religious tradition and very fundamentalist, in that in Churches of Christ, women were not allowed, right, to preach or pastor or have any kind of authority or leadership over adult men. And that meant our voices were not even considered, really. And the idea of a woman preaching or pastoring was not even a thought I had. It's like if you don't know a thing exists, you don't have the conscientization to even imagine it. So, so my early spiritual life, religious upbringing was very restrictive, but I didn't know it was restrictive. I thought this is just the way it is. The other thing that I grew up believing as a member of Churches of Christ was that our group were the only ones who were going to heaven.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So all you Baptists, United Methodists, non-denominational, all of y'all were like going to hell. And for me to let me back up a little bit, because for me to say that's what I believed, there was something within me, right, that pushed back against that. And what I understand that to be now was the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
But in Churches of Christ, at least when I was growing up, we weren't really taught about discerning the Spirit's voice, right? We weren't taught to listen to the Spirit within, right? And so the whole idea of the Holy Spirit as a voice that God gave us, right, that Jesus gave us when Jesus departed as our guide, was not something that was taught. But I sensed it. I sensed that there was something. I was very uncomfortable telling people, that they were going to hell if they weren't in the Church of Christ. Now, I did it because I thought that's what I was supposed to do. But in my body, I felt like this is wrong. But I attributed that to my being afraid. You're just afraid. The mind tricks we play when we don't have some other information to counter those ways of thinking.
Yeah. That's so interesting how, I grew up Independent Baptist.
Okay.
So I don't think I necessarily thought all other denominations were going to hell, but like in my context, it was like, I went to Bible college, right? And it was like speakers would come in and be like, hey, there's some here who are not saved. Like there's some pastors who are not saved. And you're just like, holy cow, like what's the math here? Like the math is not good on people going to.
Yeah. And even in the Black religious tradition in Churches of Christ, I remember even being taught that Martin Luther King Jr. was not a Christian.
Wow.
Right? Can you imagine that? But yes, that's what we were taught. And so my transition, really, when I went to seminary, I went to Bright Divinity School for my Master's of Divinity, as you are probably already read. But I did a research paper on the difference in response to the civil rights movement between Churches of Christ and Christian Church Disciples of Christ. And it was that research that really helped me to make an ethical decision for myself.
Interesting.
That it was time for me to move. And that's when I became affiliated with the Christian Church Disciples of Christ.
Well, welcome to the team, right? I don't know if you've been on the team longer. We may have been on the team the same amount of time, right? But
yeah. Welcome to the team.
We're playing for the home team today.
Absolutely.
What are some spiritual practices that are meaningful for you?
Well, I learned early on that writing and journaling was a way for me to excavate a lot of my trauma, hurt, pain, and also a strategy for communicating with spirit, a strategy for expressing myself to God and also hearing from God. So journaling would be for me a key spiritual practice. I also discovered that I am an introvert. Now, most people don't believe that, right? But I am. I'm an introvert, which means that being in the quiet and away from people, where I can listen to spirit, where I can listen to my own voice, my own thinking, is a spiritual practice for me. So solitude, right? Quiet. Whether it is sitting by a lake, water is very healing for me. So whether it's sitting by a lake, whether it's being on a beach somewhere in the Caribbean, whatever, being in solitude and being near water are spiritual practices for me. And another one would be what I call sisterhood. I have a few very close sister friends that have really, I believe sisterhood heals. And so part of my spiritual practices are connecting with, engaging in conversation with other Black women who are clergy. Some are clergy, some are not, but who are very spiritual. And so I would say those are three spiritual practices: journaling, solitude, being by water, and connecting with my sisters.
That's awesome. And I must say, like, as a fellow introvert, I really appreciate you sharing your energy. And we're both going to have to just take some time to recharge by ourselves after this, right?
Exactly. I could tell when I said introvert, I saw your head going up and down like he gets it.
Let's talk about kind of your call to ministry, because I'm very intrigued, So let me frame it this way. Like I said, like I grew up fundamental Baptist, and I remember a few years back, my youth pastor came into town, and some of the fellow youth group folks were like, "Hey, we should honor him at an event that was taking place." So this was sometime after I had done the whole deconstruction, reconstructing thing into the mainline context where I'm now, and it was at an event, and I got up and said a few words for the youth pastor, and I was speaking to this small crowd of teenagers, and I said, some of you, there's some here who are going to become a youth pastor like I was, who would sit and as I said those words, I thought about the fact that in that context I was speaking to, only the boys could think about that. So I want to hear more about your story and how you found your voice and your calling.
Well, it was a process, I guess, like for all of us, right? It was a process of experiences that I could no longer deny. I remember even as a little girl having I remember as a little girl being on my grandparents' farm in East Texas, which is where I was born, in East Texas, but I grew up in New York City. But I remember being on their farm in the backyard, standing on a tree stump that overlooked a pen of cows that, at night, my grandfather would bring the cows in, to the pen and where they'd be safe and protected. But what I would remember standing on a tree stump, talking very passionately to the cows.
Yeah.
And I would, like, if they would move, I would like throw a rock at them. Be still. Listen to what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And as I grew up, I would have other thoughts, other visions of myself standing in front of crowds of people talking. I didn't know what I was saying, but I knew that I was talking to groups of people, and they were listening to whatever it was I was saying. So with those thoughts in my mind, what I thought was that, I'm probably going to be a public speaker.
Yeah.
Right. And so I would always, when I would hear quotes or when I would hear sayings, I would like keep a notebook of quotes and sayings. But it never dawned on me that I would be a preacher, that I would be a pastor, right? But I knew that, I would be talking to people. I sensed that. And as I got older within the churches of Christ and, getting of marriage age, because I sensed that I was supposed to, and I'm doing air quotes, right? That I was supposed to be in some kind of ministry.
Yeah.
I had gotten to that point. But because of my limited theological understanding, I thought that I was going to support my husband in his ministry, right? So 2 marriages and divorces later, I clearly heard Spirit say, it wasn't them, it was you. And by this time, I am in seminary working on my Master's of Divinity, but I didn't even go to seminary to be a clergy person.
Really?
I went to seminary to get a PhD in pastoral theology and care so that I could help the male pastors learn how to minister effectively to women who had been abused. I have a history of child abuse in the church that I grew up in, or not grew up in, but in the church that I was a part of in Dallas. There were several women who were survivors of violence. My first career, actually my second career, was in social work.
Yeah.
And so I worked with populations of women who had experienced sexual abuse and domestic violence. And so that's why I went to seminary. But it was in seminary that I got that revelation.
Wow.
That it was, because it was seminary that I went after my second divorce. To be a pastoral theologian, right? And so the shift happened there where I realized, oh boy. And even then I resisted it because I could not think about the magnitude of what it meant to preach a sermon every week to people.
Yeah.
That just felt like such a big responsibility.
Yeah.
That I didn't think I could do.
Yeah.
And but eventually I trusted God enough to lean into that.
Yeah, I think I want to highlight this point just because it's obviously not an experience that I can. It's counter to my experience as a white male, a young white male growing up in the church, straight, cisgender, who, it was natural when I expressed interest in gifting toward ministry and preaching. It was a natural transition, for me. And as I've read some of your story, you've talked about being silenced as a young woman. How have you been able to take that experience now and help empower other Black women in ministry efforts?
Well, I do want to say something about that silencing because, as you said, for you, it was a normal progression, right? So, and probably you were in some kind of religious context that some person, male pastor, saw gifts within you and supported you in nurturing that.
Right.
Well, the same thing kind of happened with me, but the nurturing part didn't take place. I was at 2 congregations. The first, and these were Church of Christ congregations, in my early 20s, I was in a congregation of the Church of Christ, and the minister actually started calling me preacher girl.
Interesting.
Now, he was a more progressive. Okay. He got his doctor of ministry, which was not something at that time that Church of Christ ministers did.
Yeah.
They didn't have that higher level of theological education, but he did. And he's Dr. Ken Green. I love him to this day. And he saw something in me and he started calling me preacher girl. And he would give me opportunities to lead classes. Of course, it's still the Churches of Christ. And at that time, women still don't do things, but he saw. Well, I left that congregation because there were some other things going on. My divorce my second divorce happened there, and it just wasn't a healthy place for me to be.
Yeah.
And so I left that congregation, went to another Church of Christ. The minister saw, I believe he saw the giftings, and he did everything he could do to shut them down.
Wow.
So I just wanted to say that. So that was a part of the silencing, like that. But I know he saw in me, but he was not willing to nurture that in me. I didn't even see it at that time. What happened was I got an opportunity to lead some Bible studies for women when I came to that church. The Bible studies that they had already had for women were not really well attended. When I took over, the first Bible study that we had, it was wall-to-wall women. Women from other churches in Dallas were coming. And so he must have seen, like, he saw that.
Getting a little nervous.
And like, no, we got to stop this. So eventually I left that congregation because I was completely shut down. And I just could not see myself giving my tithes to a congregation that did not support me. Right. And so I left, and shortly thereafter I went to seminary. And what helped me get my voice was womanism. Was womanist thought. I was introduced to womanism at Bright Divinity School through a womanist ethicist by the name of Stacy Floyd Thomas, Dr. Stacy Floyd Thomas, who is now at Vanderbilt School of Divinity. And so that womanism, I say, saved my righteous mind because it helped me understand patriarchy. It helped me understand the intersection of being a Black woman and class and patriarchy and white supremacy. It helped me understand all of that. And so it was through the framework of womanism that helped me find my voice and reinterpreting, right, through that womanist lens, because everybody interprets scripture through a lens. Right? Everybody does. But womanism, we name it. Right?
As some have said, right, like the white males, we tend to not name our lens, right? It just is what it is.
It's the default, right?
Yeah. Why don't do you mind talking a little bit just about womanism for those who are unfamiliar?
Absolutely. So womanism is what I would call a embodied framework for thinking, doing, and being. Period. Right? So it centers the lived experiences of Black women as important, as central, as necessary. And so through a womanist lens, I engage scripture with questions. Questions where I'm looking for certain things. I'm looking for, in the biblical text, I'm looking to see, where does the power lie in this text and who hasn't? Who's silent in this text? Where are the women in this text, right? And then look at texts like, Vashti, right, in the book of Exodus, and remember her in ways that are empowering rather than problematic. Right? And so for me, womanism is not just about how I think theologically, but it's how I live, right? Because one of the tenets of womanism is something that we call traditional communalism, right? Where womanists are concerned with the survival and wholeness of entire people, not just Black women, right? So there's this idea of, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit tomorrow, this idea of Ubuntu, right? I am because we are. And so it is concerned about everyone thriving, particularly persons who are on the margins. And so when I interrogate the biblical text, when I read it, when I study it, I'm looking for the marginalized voice, to bring that voice to the center and want to see, what do they have to say? right? How have they been misunderstood in the text, right? So that's a little snippet of, and it came about. Womanism became a framework through the work of Alice Walker, right? In her book "In Search of Our Mother's Gardens," she defines the term womanism as a Black feminist or feminist of color, right? And she delineates like 4 areas, right? And many young Black women or Black women my age remember being called womanish, right? When we were growing up, wanting to know more than is good for oneself, right? But that's a good thing, because that says that we are inquisitive, we are curious, we ask questions, right?
Yeah.
We engage critically with life, right? And so during that time, in the late 60s, early 70s, there were some women at Union Theological Seminary: Dolores Williams, Katie Cannon, Jacqueline Grant, and oh my goodness, one more. I can't think of her name right off the top of my head, but they were in classes with Dr. James Cone, who is by all accounts the father of Black liberation theology. And they were like, well, now wait a minute. So you're doing all this liberation, Black liberation theology, but where are the women? Where are the voices of the Black women? And so through Alice Walker's work, they began thinking about writing about womanism in that respect. So it's different in many ways from feminism, particularly white feminism, that was not really concerned about the struggles of racism that Black women were experiencing, whereas womanism does that.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. So you've taken this passion and this experience with womanism, and it's kind of tell the story of how the Gathering came to be, this church centered on womanism, as I understand it.
Yes. Well, in 2017, myself and a few others, we had this idea of having a service where the focus was womanist preaching. In the Black religious tradition, in many churches around the Easter, Good Friday, we have what's called the 7 last sayings of Jesus, right? Yeah. And so we had the idea of, let's have a womanist 7 last words, and let's invite 7 womanist preachers to preach the womanist 7 last words. And we held that service at a largely white congregation in Dallas, to a packed house.
Wow.
And after that service, people kept coming up to us asking, where can we hear some more of this preaching right here?
Wow.
And we was like, I don't know. Nowhere in this city, right? Not on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And all of us, the 3 of us who put this together, well, at the time, it was just a couple of us who put this together with this idea.
Yeah.
We had gone through some challenges in our own church context. I had been pastoring a church that frankly said they didn't want me anymore.
Yeah.
Right. And had gone through that, and I was pretty much done, done with pastoring and being a church. But I would still get invitations, right, to preach at different places. So after that, Womanist 7 last words, then I had an opportunity to preach in New York City at a church. And again, I keep hearing this womanism. Where do we hear some more womanist preaching? And then we began having some conversations about what would it look like if we had a space, if we had a place in Dallas where we preached regularly, and the community could engage with womanist preaching. And so 3 of us, myself, Dr. Camila Hall Sharp, and another sister, oh my goodness, every time I get ready to think about her name, I lose it. Oh no. But anyway, so we began talking about planning a church. What would it look like? And so that's what we did. But let me say that. Let me back up because it wasn't a church at first.
Okay.
It was just we were going to have a space where we could offer the preaching. And we had a church building that opened up their space to us. We were going to, and we did begin having our services in the fellowship hall.
Mm-hmm.
People they were coming. And then around December, that was October of 2017, December came and we had to move our services from the fellowship hall to the sanctuary because the congregation was having another event there.
Okay.
Well, when we did that, the people who were coming loved being in the sanctuary.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we took a survey of the congregation and they said that we want to have our services in the sanctuary from now on.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we did. We started having our services in the sanctuary, and that's when we began calling ourselves a womanist church. Prior to that, we were the Gathering, period.
Yeah.
And then we became the Gathering, a womanist church, because we wanted whoever came to be clear about what we stood for. We had 3 social justice priorities: racial equity, LGBTQIA plus inclusion, and dismantling what we call PMS, patriarchy, misogyny, and sexism. And those are still our social justice priorities to this day. And so it's telling the Jesus story through a womanist lens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't know. I imagine you probably reflected on this, but I'm just thinking, hearing your story about how, the work of the Spirit of like you were silenced, and then like, I don't know, maybe I'm making assumptions here, but like the Spirit, as I'm hearing it, like, no, her voice needs to be heard. Her voice needs to be heard. Her voice needs to be heard. I mean, is that fair?
Oh, wow. I think that's fair. I never thought about it like that, but I do think that's fair. Yeah. And I would say that it's the Spirit because so many opportunities have come to me that I've never had to go looking for any.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so that's a way for me to know that this is the work of the Spirit.
Yeah.
This is not something that I have manufactured.
Yeah.
Right? The Spirit created the opportunity and the Spirit sustains it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I want to shift gears here just a little bit.
All right.
Especially based on our time. So again, as we're recording this, we're at the conference and we just heard a presentation from Dr. Thumma about
Dr. Thumma, yes.
Right, about some of just the data and a couple things stood out to me that I wanted to hear your perspective on. One is he talked about what I'll term like this change fatigue. And I was just thinking about, and he kind of alluded to it, this idea that like there's still so much change that needs to happen, yet there is clearly this change fatigue or this sense of like we're tired of change. When you talk about, the priorities of your church, the Gathering experience of racial equity, LGBT inclusion, dismantling patriarchy, like I think it's fair to say that those priorities need to come to more churches. I don't know. This is a big question, and maybe it's too big for this context. But do you have some thoughts on what you hope to see, what you'd like to see, what advice you might even give to churches or pastors?
Well, without getting into my lecture tomorrow, because a lot of this I am addressing. I think what I would say, and what I was actually thinking about, is one of the things I was thinking about as I was listening to Dr. Thumma was, congregations need to have conversations about what they really want and what they really believe.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're thinking and we're talking about congregations changing, but do they really want to?
Yeah.
Because you can't make people change.
No, I've tried.
That they don't want to.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I discovered in the church that I was pastoring before the gathering.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, I just thought of the other sister's name.
Yeah, give her a shout out.
I'm so sorry. Dr. Yvette Blair Lavallee was a part of the three of us, and she's no longer with us. She left to go get her doctorate and do some other things, but we could not have planted the gathering without Dr. Yvette Blair Lavallee. But we can't make people change. They've got to want to.
Yeah.
And so we spend a lot of time exegeting people. And that's one of the things I learned from the church that I pastored prior to the gathering, is that sometimes congregations present themselves one way on paper.
Right.
But when you, and they may even believe some things about themselves.
Yeah.
Until they're presented with these opportunities to actually transform and change.
Yeah.
And then that's when it's discovered, no, we really don't want that. We want growth, numerical growth, but we don't want to sacrifice things that we'd have to sacrifice in order to make that happen. And so there has to be a level of honesty and self-reflection, right? And really understanding who a given congregation is, not who they say they are. It's like when Jesus asked Peter and the disciples, who do people say that I, the Son of Man, am?
Yeah.
Right? Who are they saying? Right? Not who do you believe, but what are they saying about who I am? And is it true? So we have to turn that inward. Like, who am I? What do I really believe? What do I really value?
Yeah.
Do I value the performance over the praxis of ministry? Right? So I think that's a first place to do some self-assessment of these congregations. And it has to be done in such a way where the people feel really safe and comfortable telling their truth.
That's good.
Because it's really okay. Because one of the best pieces of advice someone gave me, she said, God calls a pastor to a church for one or two reasons: to help it to grow or to help it to die.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
You as a pastor have to figure out which one. Because it's okay to die.
Yeah.
It really is okay. Dying is a part of the cycle of life. And so some congregations, we have to help die well.
Yeah.
But we're trying to resuscitate congregations that are ready to die. Oh boy, I know that hurts.
Yep.
But it's true.
Yeah. This is a good word.
It's true. So how do we help them? You want to keep doing the same thing? Okay, I'll help you do that. I'll help you do that. We can just maintain the status quo here. And in 5 years, 10 years, this is where we're going to be.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's what I realized, that I did not properly exegete the membership. My expectations of them were unrealistic.
Boy, that's good. That's good.
And so when you don't have the realistic expectations, then there's frustration.
Right.
On the part of the pastor.
Right.
Because I'm doing all of this stuff. We've increased our young adults.
Yeah.
But when we have the young adults on the board, you won't listen to them. So you really don't want, So that would be one of the first things to have a real good assessment. One of the things that we did when we were considering going back into the church building after the emergency part of COVID,
Right.
because COVID is not gone. We are not post-pandemic,
Yeah.
right? We're post-emergency.
Right.
But so when we did that, we created a survey for our ministry partners. And I'll say ministry partners because we don't call people who come to our services virtually or online members.
Yeah.
Right? They're ministry partners. And that has been the language we use from day one. And so we surveyed our ministry partners to see what has changed for you theologically and spiritually as a result of COVID. What's shifted in the way you think about church attendance? How have your values changed? Right? Because we're wanting to look at the truth to help us to know how to move forward. And because of what we gathered from our ministry partners, we realized that, okay, so some things have shifted. What we need to do, and most still value in-person worship, but they don't value it enough to come every week. Right? And neither did the pastors.
Yeah.
Neither did we. And that's the truth. And so what we do now is we're in person twice a month, but we're virtual every week. But we always had, from day one, we always had a strong virtual presence.
Yeah.
Right. And so we built out more of a virtual component. But that's because we took the time to find out what the people that we were serving value.
Yeah, that's good stuff. So speaking of serving people, you have some experience as a social worker.
Yes.
I'm kind of a social worker now myself in my professional context as we're speaking. I'm curious what your thoughts are from your experience in social work, how pastors what pastors could learn from social work and better apply to their ministry.
Well, social work 101 is you meet people where they are, not where you want them to be.
Goes back to your change.
Or where you hope they are, but where they are. And that informs the way I do ministry, right? It is understanding people, the people that God has equipped me to serve, is knowing them. And that means that we have to be in a relationship, right? And that means that I have to create an atmosphere, an environment where people feel safe enough, right, to speak their truth and to live their truth. And that I even had that mindset raising my daughter. I knew as a person who did not have, in many ways, that freedom as a child growing up, wanted to give that to my daughter. I never wanted to shame her because shame causes people to hide.
Yeah, it does.
I.e. Adam and Eve, right?
Yeah.
The first humans. It causes people to hide. And so I knew for her, I had to create an environment where she felt safe to tell me the truth and to be her authentic self. And that is exactly what I have now that my daughter's 30, right? That's what we built. That's the same way I pastor, right? And so I think that's the place where I would say you've got to cultivate that environment where people feel safe enough to tell you their truth, and it doesn't involve shaming them.
Well, this is good stuff. I want to respect your time here. So there's a lot of more questions I want to ask you, but for sake of your time and mine, let's take a quick break and come back with some closing questions. All right, we're back with Reverend Dr. Irie Lynn Session. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate the conversation. So these closing questions, like I mentioned, you can take these as seriously or not as you'd like to. If you're Pope for a day, what might that look like for you?
Well, if I'm Pope for a day, I'm telling I'm telling the Catholic Church that two things. I'm telling them that LGBTQIA plus people are loved by God, and we ought to treat them as such, which means that they're not condemned to hell.
Yeah.
Right? That God made them that way, and that there's a place for them to fulfill their callings in the body of Christ, whatever that is.
Yeah.
The second is like unto it for women. Women can be priests.
Yeah.
Women can be pope.
Well, there you go.
There you go.
That's a good day.
That's a great day.
It's a good day. A theologian or historical Christian figure you'd want to meet or bring back to life?
The people that came to my mind are not necessarily Christian figures.
Sure.
They are found in the Old Testament. Okay. I would want to have some conversation with Queen Vashti.
Okay.
I would want to know what it was that enabled her to say no to King Artaxerxes. And I would want to know what was the risk? What was the price she paid?
Yeah.
Because the text doesn't necessarily say what the price was.
Right.
I would want to know what the price was that she was willing to pay for that.
Yeah.
And then I would want to have a conversation with Delilah.
Oh.
Yeah, Delilah. Delilah or Jezebel. Either one of those.
Yeah.
I would want to have a conversation with Delilah because Delilah has been given a bad rap.
Yeah, she has.
Right? And I write about Delilah in a book that I wrote called Badass Women of the Bible. And the title of my chapter on Delilah is You Don't Own Me.
Huh.
And so I would like to get on a podcast with Delilah, and have her set the record straight.
Yeah.
Right. And with Jezebel, because this is 3, right? With Jezebel, I think, she was a bad girl. At the same time, I see Jezebel through a trauma lens.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because think about it. So she was forced to marry a man she did not respect.
Yeah. What was his name?
Ahab.
That's right. You're good with these biblical names here. I can't remember.
Yeah. She was forced to marry a man that she did not respect so that her dad, right, could have these trade routes. Right? It was an economic thing. She was really prostituted by her dad and her husband, right? She had her own religion. She had her own, and so I would want Jezebel to set the record straight too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good. Thanks for sharing that.
So I'd love to meet them.
Yeah. I like the idea of like a podcast with that too.
Yeah.
What do you think history will remember from our current time and place?
Oh, man. I hate to say this. I think history will remember the church's complicity in fascism. The church's complicity in having a conspiracy of silence around justice issues. And hopefully they'll remember that there was a remnant, that there were voices who did the best they could under the circumstances to speak truth to power, and not just speak truth to power, but to mitigate change and transformation in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about hopes? What do you hope for the future of Christianity?
I hope that we will live, love, That's it.
Okay. Gotta write that down here. Live love. Simple yet profound.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Where can people connect with you if they'd like to get your book, that sort of thing?
Yeah, well, I'm on all the socials at Rev Dr. Irie, RevDririe, on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or X.
Yeah.
Same handle, same social media handle. And my books, I have 3, are all on Amazon. So if you put my name, Irie Lynn Session, it's Lynn, Lynne, Session, no S on the end of Session.
Yeah.
They'll come up.
Well, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I always leave folks with a word of peace. So may God's peace be with you.
Thank you so much, and also with you.
Thanks for joining us on the Future Christian Podcast. To learn more about Lauren or the podcast, visit future-christian.com. One more thing before you go. Do us a favor and subscribe to the podcast. And if you're feeling especially generous, leave a review. It really helps us get the word out to more people about the podcast. The Future Christian Podcast is a production of Torn Curtain Arts and Resonate Media. Our episodes were mixed by Danny Burton, and the production support is provided by Paul Romig-Levitt. Thanks, and go in peace.